The 2024 season has officially concluded, with the Philadelphia Eagles successfully dethroning the reigning two-time champs, the Kansas City Chiefs, thus ending any conversation of a three-peat for at least a few years. And while we did end with a bit of a dud, as this was the Super Bowl that no one wanted to see, there was so much happening in the NFL throughout that I wanted to create a video that would recap the season in a nice, neat little bow. I will do my best to mention every single team at least once in this video, but if I do miss one, let me know in the comments down below. That being said, this is Triple DS. Please subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 5,000 subs, but the only way to really get this going is to start in the 2024 offseason. The offseason was full of big moves. You had Kirk Cousins break the bank yet again, signing with Atlanta. You had King Henry joining Baltimore to create one of the greatest rushing duos in the league. Elsewhere, you had Buffalo moving on from Stephon Diggs, sending him to Houston, who looked to take the next step with their Rookie of the Year, CJ Stroud. Jim Harbaugh would return to the league to be the main guy in LA. Chicago, Washington, Minnesota, and Denver all got their quarterback of the future, while Arizona got a junior that had big shoes to fill. The rumor that the Bills love their father Patrick Mahomes was proven to be true when they let Kansas City trade back into the first round to draft Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy, the fastest man to run the 40-yard dash. Sorry, John Ross, now you will truly be forgotten. Moving into training camp, Burrow finally wasn't hurt, so that means the Bengals will finally get off to a fast start. Right? Can't say the same for first-round pick JJ McCarthy, who suffered a devastating meniscus injury that resulted in Minnesota surely playing for a top draft selection instead of the playoffs. Right? 49ers first-round wide receiver Ricky Pearsall was shot before the start of the season, but don't worry, he still returned to the field before Michael Thomas. Buffalo's Keon Coleman became the most beloved rookie for a bit there, and Brock Bowers was a sleeping giant ready to take the league by storm. Well, at least in fantasy football. Also, Cooper DeJean was taken in the second round, but more on him later. This is also year one of the league officially banning the hip drop tackle. As far as projections go, the Chiefs were the team to beat with nearly half the AFC on their tail. Aaron Rodgers was finally healthy. The Bills and Ravens looked to get past the hump, and Burrow was fully healed from his freak wrist injury the year prior. Elsewhere in the NFC, the three-headed monster were the Eagles, Niners, and Lions. All of them had loaded rosters that could compete with anyone. The 49ers especially, since Christian McCaffrey was supposed to come back in week 1. Right, Kyle Shanahan? Right? With the games underway and the first few weeks progressing, a few things became apparent. The Bengals will always be bad in September. The Chiefs and the refs' love for each other was at an all-time high. And to the surprise of many, the Commanders and the Vikings were at the top of their division. Last year's #1 overall pick Bryce Young did not get off to a good start, with his team being outscored 73-13 in the first 2 weeks of the season. And he was inevitably benched for Andy Dalton. You also can't forget this moment between Stroud and Caleb Williams when Stroud would Lil Bro the #1 overall pick as if he was a 13-year vet in the league. Also, the Saints had the most dominant first 2 weeks of the season. Does anyone else remember that? Many also forget that by week 1, there was already the first of many Will Levis memes that would just not relent week in and week out. 8 weeks into the season, the Kansas City Chiefs were the only team undefeated at 7-0. Devontae Adams had been traded to the Jets in such a big reveal that led to ultimately nothing. The AFC West and NFC North began to take over the standings, minus the Raiders, and your eventual Super Bowl champs were barely in the playoffs, standing in the 7th seed in a surprisingly tough NFC picture. Despite Caleb Williams being the most hyped player in the draft, he was 4 or 5 players away from being the best rookie in the class. You had breakouts from Jaden Daniels, who had the Commanders in second place to this point, Bo Nix, who was coming into his own, and it wasn't just the quarterbacks, as when healthy, Malik Nabers was the lone bright spot on the Giants. Brian Thomas and Brock Bowers were also becoming #1 options for their teams, respectively. And it's by this point in the season you also had a legitimate battle between Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry to see who was actually the best back in the league. It wasn't great for everyone though, as you had the Cowboys Cowboys spiraling out of control. The only thing consistent every week with Dallas was Jerry Jones putting his foot in his mouth with every interview he took.
Well, my job is to ask
why. Job, or I'll get somebody else to ask these questions, man. I'm not kidding.
But during week 7, it's as if the world stopped and united for a moment when Deshaun Watson would tear his Achilles and the world in unison celebrated. Well, everyone except Jameis Winston.
So I'm going to support him, I'm going to lift him up, and I'm going to be there for him.
You also can't forget this moment where the wheels began to fall off for the Chicago Bears, which was made worse when the safety thought the game was over, taunting the Commanders fans that were in the stands. As we cruise past the third quarter of the season, Saquon made one of the greatest hurdles of all time. The Chiefs finally tasted defeat in a loss to the Bills, but still had control of the number 1 seed. Hot on their trails were the said Bills, Ravens, and Steelers to this point. And speaking of Pittsburgh, what a quarterback battle that they had. They started the season with Justin Fields due to injury to Russell Wilson and shockingly turned to the vet when he became available. But it turned out that this was best for business, as with Wilson in the lineup, the Steelers' offense looked pretty damn good. But that was until Tomlin got his mandatory 9 wins and the team ultimately collapsed shortly thereafter. The NFC West by this point was up for grabs for anyone. The Seahawks were barely hanging on to the lead at just 6-5, while Arizona and LA were making a case to be the team in the division, since the Niners decided to take a year off. The NFC South was also close, but it was more of a two-man race, as the Saints, after having probably the greatest first 2 weeks a team could hope for, were the first to fire their head coach. Kirk Cousins looked like he was worth every penny until about this point in the season, where the calls for Penix became so loud that the team could not ignore them anymore. The NFC North looked to be the greatest division of all time, minus collapsing Bears, of course. The Lions were the clear-cut best team in the NFC. Despite injuries beginning to mount, they would be sitting at 11-1 to this point, with the upstart Vikings hot on their trails at 10-2. Did I mention this is all with Sam Darnold? And not far from them, you had the Packers at 9-3. The team in third place in the NFC South, the Green Bay Packers, would be the first in 4 other divisions in the entire NFL. And as we approach the end of the regular season, you begin to see contenders playing each other, and the results were sometimes close, while other times contenders were blown out. In the NFC, Detroit was still the team to beat, yes, but they were just getting hurt more and more each and every week, with the Eagles now finally starting to get noticed, as they hadn't lost a game since week 6. The only team as hot as Philly were the Rams, and I don't know why nobody would talk about them. I guess, and I won't either. So moving on. During the final few weeks of the season, the Bengals would knock off the Broncos, giving themselves, Miami and Indy, a chance for the 7 seed, but in the end, Denver won its last game against the Chiefs backups, officially claiming the final spot in the playoffs. And due to a Tampa Bay win and a Falcons loss, the Bucs would take the NFC South, wrapping up the playoffs, and the stage was set. You had the Chiefs and Lions at the 1 seed, while the rest of the field made their case to play in the divisional. And I gotta say, every single AFC matchup was a one-sided game, with the Texans defeating the Chargers, the Ravens beating the Steelers, and the Bills stomping out the Broncos.
It should have been me, not him!
Meanwhile, in the NFC, you had some upsets to say the least. You had the red-hot Rams stunning the 14-3 Vikings, the Commanders beating the Bucs on the road, and the Eagles surprisingly getting past the Packers with relative ease. The divisional round was a fun one to say the least. The Texans would lose to the Chiefs, making their divisional record now 0-6. You had 2 teams on fire between Philly and LA, with the Eagles making it out of that one. The stunner, however, came when the Commanders not only defeated the Lions, but put up a 45-point burger in a dominating win no one saw coming. And just like that, the 3 NFC North teams were out of the playoffs.
You're a big fat phony!
Finally, you had the Bills taking on the Ravens, where the winner would face KC and the loser would begin doubting themselves if they can ever make it past the hump. The game was decided in the final 2 minutes. Jackson would find likely for a touchdown, and Baltimore tried for a 2-point conversion to tie the game. Unfortunately, they could not get it done, and the Bills held on to their 27-25 lead. The conference championship games were set, and they were games cemented in rivalry. In the NFC, you had the Eagles taking on their rivals in the Commanders. The Commanders, might I add, were the only team since week 6 to defeat the Eagles. And in the AFC, while they weren't rivals due to their division, you knew that these teams in the Chiefs and Bills did not like each other. And as these matches unfolded, one turned into a blowout. The other one, a classic to say the least. The Eagles would trounce their rivals 55-23, and in the game in Arrowhead, Mahomes and the refs would pull off a fast one and they would defeat the Bills 32-29. But don't worry, KC haters, the voodoo magic would finally wear off 2 weeks later when the Chiefs would take on the Eagles. Philly would stomp the ever-living daylights out of the Chiefs. The MVP was that D-line that the Eagles had. They would only rush 4 and they would get pressure on damn near every single play. Mahomes had never looked so bad in his career, and that is a statement to a guy that a lot of people want to call the GOAT. But he's not there yet.
I'm a choker. I'm a trash can. Jalen Hurts absolutely destroyed me tonight.
And I couldn't think of a more deserving fan base to get their second Super Bowl in the last 10 years. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the 2024 season summed up. I guess I should mention that Josh Allen won MVP. Some people say Lamar should have got it. And I want to say that is it. Is there any team I didn't mention? Okay, well, I don't think I mentioned the Patriots, so... Hey, you guys had that guy Tom Brady play for you guys a few years ago. If you've made it this far, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to thumbs up this video as it helps my small channel out tremendously. Thank you guys so much for your support. But until next time, I'm sad the season's over. But anyway, ship boy.